A question from Thierry Dubois, Aviation Week, for the Rafale. Where have you reached in Switzerland, in Finland, in Indonesia, and in Croatia? The question as such is very interesting. There are already 4 countries that are mentioned, and I'd like to confirm that they are under discussions with us. There are countries where it is a standardized discussion. There's a call for tender, which is the case for Switzerland and Finland. There are other countries where it is a bilateral discussion. As you know, you're used to this. I won't say more, but I have hopes that among these 4 countries, we will have results in 2021. Question from Véronique Guillermin, Figaro, and Gesche Weber from the Person-Zeitung. What about the global business aviation market? North American, Chinese, etc. It was very difficult in 2020 at the beginning, but it's less difficult than commercial aviation, civil aviation. The air activity of the business jets took off more easily than civil aviation. We observe 80% compared to a normal year. A lot of domestic flights, of course, for business aviation. And secondly, we did not sell a lot of new aircraft. And there was a strong drop among our competitors in terms of percentage, or drop in the activity, around 30%. Pre-owned aircrafts, the market did very well. You have the new arrivals in business jets. They don't want to have a new aircraft because they don't want to wait for it. And they're ready to put in a little money to have a pre-owned aircraft and fly immediately with a business jet, considering the crisis in civil aviation. So that is encouraging for us. This means that the number of potential global clients in business aviation is increasing, and that is positive. Geographically speaking, it's difficult to say, as very often when you come out of a crisis, you see it coming from the West when you live here in Europe. And we observe in the United States a slight recovery. It's quite recent because the United States were very strongly hit by the COVID crisis, but they have an ability to rebound. They are very flexible, and so therefore they recover very quickly. And in the United States, we observe a slight brightness in the field of business jets. In Asia, things are more difficult because China, things are highly controlled. It's always been so, but it's even worse today. And the rest of the Asian countries, it is picking up, but this is just the beginning. The crisis did not improve all this, but some countries are interested in Asia. Europe is the continent that is most affected. Everything stopped and halted in Europe. The crisis was the most difficult for the European countries, where aviation stopped. We even saw, considering the increase in the environmental pressures, some internal flights were stopped, whereas other countries are developing domestic transport because that is a sector that helps create more momentum in the economy. So to do that, you have to have more air transport, and not to mention train and the other modes of transportation. So this is what I wanted to tell you about the market. Throughout 2021, we will observe this hope, which is coming from the United States, and I hope that Europe will pick up soon after.
Question from Michel Cabiron, La Tribune, on NGF. How can Dassault be a leader if Airbus has 2/3 of the load? Are you respecting the principle, the best athlete principle? I'm sure we'll have questions on NGF. This is a good question. I've already accepted it. We can handle the project with this 1/3, 2/3 workload. It's possible we're architects if the roles are distributed well. If we can manage the project, we can do this. What would be more difficult would be one third for all packages. Then it wouldn't work anymore because I need the tools to be able to manage the project. So one third is complicated, but if it should also apply to the work packages and even the strategic work packages. For example, that's the flight controls. If I'm told there's no leader in flight controls, that can't work. You need someone in charge. I'm just mentioning that example. There are several. That's the issue today. If we accept too much joint work, so there's no leader anymore, or if we give too much responsibility to Airbus, who is counting Spain and Germany, then it becomes difficult for Dassault to play the role of the prime contractor. Airbus accepts Dassault is the prime contractor, but we also need to be able to commit to the three countries to play that role. That's the difficulty now.
Question from Pierre Tran, SLD Info, and Thomas Halgo from Handelsblatt on the NGF. As for intellectual property, the French say that the Germans want access to all the know-how from their partners, but the Germans want access only to the work carried out together. What is the reality according to you? What would be the compromises, and how can we reach such compromises? We must not caricature this issue regarding intellectual property. First of all, as in any area, the one who creates is the owner of his technology. The creator must be protected, not the one paying. Often we confuse the one paying and the one creating. The creator remains the owner of his intellectual property, and especially the background, as we call it. That is for Daso, 70 years of experience. That is our property in terms of technology. That doesn't mean that we're not ready to use this intellectual capacity to build a future program. No. But you cannot force me to give intellectual property. It belongs to me. I can share it if I wish to share it, but I remain the owner. As for the studies that will be carried out from tomorrow onwards together, this is the foreground. In the field of foreground, there are no problems regarding the topic. We have clauses that allow us to protect the foreground, considering third parties that would not be part of the foreground. So that is done. And so from that point of view, the issue is not between Airbus and Dassault. We share the same values as industrialists. It is between the states. And that is where we have certain issues. I'd like to reassure those who mix up intellectual property with those who talk about the black box. A black box is an American aircraft. They say it's a black box. You cannot even look into the box and find out what is inside. There'll be no black box. In the FCAS from Daso, everything will be open. All the companies developing our programs, even if some responsibilities are strictly Dassault or strictly Airbus, states will have access. They will know what is in the black box. So there's no black box. It's got nothing to do with intellectual property. Question from Thomas Hanke from Handelsblatt for NGF. Dassault is talking about its technological superiority vis-à-vis Airbus. But what about flight controls, stealthiness, etc.? I mean, is it that easy? It's not very easy to know who is superior compared to the other. This question was never there. This is just imagination. It does not exist. The topic today is to ensure a proper implementation. We need to have levers. I need to take responsibility to commit myself vis-à-vis the states. And it is within this responsibility and the sharing of tasks that we have this problem. As for superiority or or no superiority, I cannot measure. It's not up to me to do that. I just know that for the past 70 years, I built flight controls for fighters, and I build flight controls for my Falcon aircraft alone. I do this alone, and this gives me a certain amount of experience. Maybe others have other experience. I have a lot of respect for Airbus and the flight controls of Airbus, but that's the design office that is in Toulouse. And we can talk about all the different topics like that. So there is no comparison as such. There is an experience that we're trying to highlight. But the issue right now is the sharing of the workload to have a proper control of all this. A question from Dominique Perry and Anne Boer, Les Echos. The German trade unions would like to build a second NGF demonstrator in Germany. Do you think there is a possibility or a need for that to happen? Well, the question is generating a lot of other questions. I'll answer all these issues one after the other. First, if we build a demonstrator, and if we were to build another one, which is not planned today, this is not asked for by the states, but if we were to build a second one, we would build it in the same way. We're not going to have a manufacturing plant for a demonstrator that would be shared between France, Germany, and Spain, and a second demonstrator done differently. So it would be a second identical demonstrator. Then the problem is not from Daso. If I'm paid for a second demonstrator, I'm very happy. It's a question of the different states. So it's an issue between the different nations, between the different states. A question from Pierre Tran. The Franco-German discussions on the FCAS, are they on this question regarding exports? The answer is no. There was this entire issue of the continuation of the Brexit agreements. So today there is nothing of all that in the FCAS. That is not the topic. There's a fact. The perception in Germany and the perception in France can be different. But there were agreements signed between the states for the ability to export a fighter done together. But now we're not just two, we're three. We're talking about the French and the German, but now we have the Spanish also. Question from Mathieu Rapchaud, AFP. The current discussions on NGF and FCAS, does it allow us to have an agreement signed in time for the validation of the electoral constraints in Germany? Well, each country has its own constraints. A cooperation fighter aircraft program in the defense industry, these are programs that will take place over 30 to 40 years. So to just look at the elections in each country, because not only Germany, we will have elections in France, we'll have elections in Spain too. So that is a difficulty. We need to have a governance process that can do, the elections will take place. The governments will stem from the results of these elections, but we need to have a certain amount of resilience and persistence in the decisions. We shouldn't have a strategic and industrial calendar based on the electoral calendar. So there are elections in Germany. We know that. It's going to be in 2021. There'll be another one in 2022 in France. Fine, but we have to agree, of course, but we cannot agree, and especially if there are disagreements, solve the disagreements just because there are elections in Germany. Question from Michel Cabirol. How are the French specificities managed for the FCAS, the nuclear navy? Who's going to pay? Well, listen, as a leader of NGF, I have a clear request to take into account in the future an aircraft that will be on an aircraft carrier. And the aircraft carrier that was launched a few months ago in France. So I have an imperative from my government so as to put that aircraft on the aircraft carrier. So therefore, we need certain choices, need certain arbitrations. We need to make a certain number of decisions. As for the nuclear, it's the same thing, and I won't say anything more.
Question from Dominique Perry from Flight. Daso and France could they do FCAS and NGF alone? Well, you have to ask France. It would be a political decision. But on technical terms, Dassault can make aircraft alone, of course. We make Rafale and Falcons alone every day. Secondly, Safran can make fighter plane engines. They've done it for Rafale. And third, Thales can make radars, countermeasures, a number of electronic equipment. So if you add Dassault, Safran, and Thales, and add MBDA for missiles, the answer technically is yes. But the real question, the real challenge here is efficacy. Do we want to make a fighter plane cooperation, a fighter plane that meets the operational needs of the three countries for 2040, and that's effective and that we can export because it's competitive compared to American and Chinese even competition? If I listen to Americans fearing Chinese and Russian competition, and at what price for each country? You see, what's the budget for each country? That's the question that each country needs to ask. We're working cooperation to be more effective, not just for the fun of it. There's an operational need, we feel, a commitment to keep and budgets. The DGA reminds us every day that we have to be lead to keep to budget. So can I be the prime contractor when I'm told who the subcontractor should be, how we should work, and there are three of us deciding? That's hard because I'm alone facing two.
Question from Dominique Perry, Thomas Hanke. Do you think that the FCAS and the British Tempest could merge at a later stage? And if so, don't you think you'd have the same intellectual property issues with the British? And this will be made worse because of the links between the British and the American links. Oh, this gives me an opportunity to talk about the British. The cooperation between the United States and the British on the F-35, I don't know if the intellectual properties with the Lockheed, the Americans, their technology, the stealth technologies are very well locked, especially the black box vision generated in Germany that must have this vision of the black box by the American experience and not by the French experience. So yes, we have to know that there will be difficulties with the British in that area, but we had begun with the studies with the British, and we can work with the British also, merge the FCAS and the Tempest. That is not on our agenda. A question from Olivier Gess, Usine Nouvelle, Vincent Michon, Challenge, Mr. Cabirol, and Maurice Lèvre, Thébert Marot. Don't you think that the FCAS might die in the near future? And don't you think we need to have something else? The Americans have the F-15, which is regularly upgraded and which will remain operational for decades to come. Well, I do not know. I don't think that it's going to die soon, but I cannot say that the patient is not in a difficult state. So that is where we are. But we still believe in it. We still believe that we can succeed. And if we don't succeed, the question would be, what is our plan B? And our plan B, well, I'll not talk about that today, but it must integrate the ability of states to have plan Bs. Each company always has a plan B. It does everything so that plan A might succeed, but the day when plan A does not succeed, it needs to have a plan B. So either plan A works or you go directly to plan B.
Question from Stéphane Barsky. What about the FCAS deported parts? Well, Germans are responsible for the Eurodrone, and others are responsible for remote carriers and the system of systems. We don't have any responsibility in those areas. And now to the Eurodrone from Dominique Perry. There are questions about Spain being able to honor its part in development costs of Eurodrone? What would happen if Spain pulled out of the program? I'm not saying this for Spain, because Spain is a respected and respectable partner. But let me say this, generally speaking, when you have a cooperation of several countries, each country wants more for its own country. It's only natural. And so they say they can put a lot of money into it. Right now, there are three of us, so at least 1/3 of the development and the whole program, because then it will be, when the aircraft come out, each will say they want more, as many as possible, and then you have to be able to come up with a budget. And once you start with a certain architecture and a workload sharing, it's very hard to say, okay, you're not going to have the budget a couple of years from now, then we can switch things around. No, it's too late. So it's really at the start. Everything is decided. And right now it's 3/3.
Question from Anne Boer, Les Echos, and Dominique Perry. The first deliveries of the Eurodrone will arrive later than planned, 2029, according to Airbus. How can you be sure that the plane will have right technical levels? Well, I suggest you ask this question to the person building the Eurodrone, that is Airbus. Maurice Pierre de Aero, the project, Franco-German project, will it follow the same winding road as the FCAS? No, I don't think so, because the major difference today between the Franco-German program, maritime surveillance, is that we have Mr. Schell, who knows what he's talking about outside, that is Daso, who has the experience since 1958 of the maritime surveillance aircraft. Who else? We had Atlantic 1, Breguet. We had Atlantic 2, that was Daso. We had the upgrading of ATL 2, that is Daso, and it's still the case. We have Ocean, the verticalized support of our maritime surveillance and patrols, and that's our skill. And so the topic is different. Is it on a better path? I'll let you analyze that. Question from Matthew Rapshaw, AFP. What do you think about the competition with the Rafale in the midterm, with the new American projects of fighter aircraft to take over the F-16? Well, I think it's very bright. We have an operational aircraft fighter demonstrated by the French Army or the National Navy. We are successful in exports. The first feedback we can have from the countries that have bought the Rafale is also very positive. We have a compact aircraft that can do everything, air-air, air-ground, air-sea, because this is in the hands of the Navy too. It is the smallest aircraft that can do all this with the range, with drag, which is very good, with the payload, which is very good. So the smallest versatile aircraft, that is the Rafale. And this is why it is going to please. In the past, it wasn't known. It had never been exported. But now we can say that it's a success for France. It's a success in terms of export. And it has a bright future for the French industry. Question from Thierry Dubois. Egypt, India, and Qatar, could they make new Rafale orders? We wish so, but you have to ask them the question.
A question from Veronique Yamark of Figaro and Gesche Wipper from the Börsen Zeitung. What are the assets of the business jet market in the current context? Could this push some companies to invest in your aircraft? Well, its strength is flexibility, modularity, the ability to go through much less crowded airports. So you can save time. We're going to have fewer trips as a consequence of COVID. The business travels will go down because for the use of video conferencing, even though I believe seeing people for real is key when you want to see your customers or providers and work together, but it'll be more effective. So business jets meet this, and Americans have known this for a while, and Europeans are starting to realize it. So it will develop responsibly, and we'll be able to introduce ways of decarbonizing through biofuel or new clean technologies. The business jet market compared to the rest of the aviation market is very small compared to the global aviation, which accounts for 2 to 3% of carbon emissions. So it's a tool in the service of companies to continue developing relationships and being in touch with people, which is something we really need and miss today. A question from Dominique Perry. What is your roadmap for the green plane in 2035? We, talking here as Daso, not Chifas, we're a part of the CORAC program, but the technology we're looking at need to meet certain programs. The CSEX program is consuming less because the use of past technologies comes into play today. So we're seeing a drop in the carbon footprint, and this will also apply to the new Falcon. Breakthrough technologies, that's for later. We'll discuss this a few years from now.
Question de Thierry Dubois.
Question from Thierry Dubois. What is the role of Dassault Aviation in the biofuel line? Well, we are not going to create the biofuels, so we're encouraging to use them because we can use them already today. I'd like to repeat, 50% right from today. We can easily go to 100 use of biofuels. Our clients are ready to do that. Of course, you're going to pay a little bit more. You're going to pay a little bit more for the fuel. Our clients in business aviation and Falcons are ready to pay a little more for their fuels to fly with biofuels. So therefore, we're encouraging the big ones, and we're working with some of the majors in this area so that we can do that very quickly. This will happen before the breakthrough technologies. Question from Gisho Wooper. What about the pre-owned business jet market? Very well. They're doing very well. As I said earlier on, it developed during the crisis. A lot of clients went to business jets because civil aviation had halted. They didn't want to go into airports that are less crowded today, but that were still crowded. So there's a greater health safety, which is brought through the use of business jets. A question from Thierry Dubois. All the French Rafales are they at the F3R standard? Yes, they will follow that standard. As far as I remember, this should be in 2022. This is underway. The retrofitting is underway. It should be ready by 2022. Last two questions. Michel Cabirol, La Tribune. For the Rafale, could you increase your production if you obtain new orders? This is a question I've been hearing for the past 10 years. 10 years ago, the question was the number of orders, and today some believe that if we have too many orders, we won't be able to do this. But I don't care. It's going to give a headache to our producers because we have to increase the speed, and it's a lot of work. But this is not the same type of issues as we had 1 year ago, where we thought that the change would stop. Yes, we can increase the speed of our lines. We were at speed 1, and now we're at speed 2. We can go to speed 3. Not that simply. We would need more time. Maybe we would need more tools. Maybe the people would have to be repositioned at the right stations, but we can reach speed 3. And last question, Véronique Le Guillemard, Le Figaro. The Aubert and Duval dossiers, do you want them to be solved quickly? How come that company is strategic for Dassault? Yes, that company is strategic for the entire French aviation sector. It's true for Airbus, Safran, Dassault Aviation. All our subcontractors use this equipment. this material, the way we qualify material to be used in aeronautics, that is vital for the French aeronautical sector. So it is very important to stabilize this company in the coming weeks. It's been too long. We've been talking about the difficulties with this company. We are in favor of a sustainable solution with this company, and we really wish to have a solution so that we can keep manufacturing going through this company. Well, time is flying. Although you're not here in front of me, but I have a screen in front of me and I can see a few faces, and that's very nice. I'd like to wish you a very pleasant day. And we'll have the opportunity to talk again, particularly for the first flight of the 6X, which will be in the near future. Thank you very much.